Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
After late-night votes and a contentious markup, Congress is inching forward on some of its highest-profile priorities, including ICE and CBP funding and the annual defense authorization bill. Regular appropriations for 2027 are also moving through committees. Loren Duggan, Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government, joins me now to walk us through where things stand. Loren, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It was another busy week on the Hill. Let's start with what moved forward. The Senate found its way finally to approval of funding for ICE and CBP. Tell us how that happened and what happens next.
So you're right. The Senate passed the $70-ish billion bill for ICE, CBP, and parts of the Homeland Security Department. That had been its initial goal for pretty much when they decided to break off that funding from the regular Homeland Security Appropriations Bill for 2026 and do this. It's a longer-term bill to fund the agencies for several years. But they had a lot of hurdles to get through and over, and they finally managed to do that. The biggest one this week had been the $1.8 billion weaponization fund or anti-weaponization fund that had been announced as part of a settlement, and senators looking for some sort of language around that. But in the end, they didn't attach anything to the bill, in part because of some developments around what administration officials had said over the course of the week. But that bill's over that first hurdle, and now it's over to the House to see how quickly they can be done with it as well.
And does it look like there's enough commonality to get them to move quickly?
I think so. I mean, there seemed to be pretty broad Republican support for the underlying bill in the Senate, with I think only one departing vote in the end. We'll see if they have that in the House as well. Obviously, the margin's very tight there, but they're going to try and get that through, I would say, as quickly as they can this week.
So let's go back to the Senate side, because underneath that was a lot of drama. There was a lot that was happening as folks put forward measures to try to make statements or get positions. Where did all of that settle out?
It sort of settled out with nothing being added to the bill, and it was a lot of time used to get there. I think 18 hours almost. They started around 10 a.m. and wound up around 4 in the morning, a little bit after that. But that's the challenge with reconciliation. You trade this ability to get a party line bill through easily through the Senate, but you have to go through these hoops of getting the amendments, and it has to be very narrowly tailored to the federal budget. So that's part of the drama when it comes to these reconciliation bills, these late nights and a lot of tension, with the parliamentarian being kind of raised up as a very important figure, as you have to pass muster with her rules and her interpretation of the rules when it comes to the language in the bill and the amendments as well.
Speaking of the parliamentarian, the money for the ballroom did not make it into this reconciliation, did it?
That's right. That wasn't there in the end. That was in one of the initial drafts, $1 billion for the Secret Service for the East Wing project. And they had said that wouldn't be building the ballroom part, but security around it and other improvements at the White House. But in the end, that was too difficult a thing to get through. So that was pulled out from the version that the Senate passed.
So that's one big piece of legislation that's moved forward. Another big piece on the House side is the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act. It made it through committee. That was another long day for folks. Tell us about how that vote proceeded.
Yeah, this bill would authorize $1.15 trillion, which is the discretionary part that the president had asked for and would be kind of given shape by this bill. It was, I think, 44-12 was the final vote, which is a little less bipartisan than they aimed for with this bill. But there are concerns among Democrats about the amount that's being authorized here. There were amendments to try to peel some of that back at a lower amount. But in the end, that version of the bill went through, and we'll see how quickly they can move. The Senate will join that debate this week as well, with the Armed Services Committee crafting its bill over the course of the week, and those will head to the two chambers, and then at some point they'll try to compromise them. And one of the big things that the House did before the House panel did was to approve the name change from Department of Defense to Department of War, which is something that some people in Congress have strong feelings about. So we'll see if that survives through that process as it continues its way through Congress.
Do you read anything into the tea leaves about the less bipartisan vote count?
I mean, it may be difficult to see how that gets through. Sometimes the bills have provisions that are in the House version. Then when you meld with the Senate, they moderate out a little bit because the minority in the Senate does have a lot of sway there with the need to get to 60 votes. So we'll see how it plays out. It's early in this process. And then there's also the separate appropriations process for defense that hasn't really gotten underway yet, although we'll probably see subcommittee action this week in the House, at least on the actual appropriations, in addition to this authorization bill.
Loren Duggan is the Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Loren, I want to pull you in a slightly different direction. There's a common leadership adage that personnel is policy. And there were a couple of personnel announcements last week that some people think got in the way of the administration's policy. One was Bill Pulte to be the acting DNI. They were very clear that that's just an acting appointment. And also the president expressed his intent to nominate Todd Blanche as Attorney General. At the same time as the FISA bill is sitting on everybody's desks trying to find a way out, and the anti-weaponization fund was front and center of conversation. How do you see those all playing together?
Pulte, I think, definitely played into some things that we saw last week. There was an amendment to the reconciliation bill saying that you had to have the right qualifications for the job and try to ban funding. That amendment wasn't adopted either, but it was a part of the debate, and people had to navigate that question. There was a procedural vote right after reconciliation wrapped up to try to get on to the House-passed FISA reauthorization, and that fell short. They didn't get the 50 votes they needed to get onto that, so that was a hiccup in their plans to try and take care of FISA before it expires on June 12th. Now there's options. They could try again when they get back. They could look at another extension. We'll see if they need that. But that certainly played in there. And then with Todd Blanche, who's the acting attorney general, who was once the president's personal attorney and was part of this negotiation that led to the fund, he did say before Congress last week he wouldn't pursue it while the legal case was there. And I think that helped move some of the discussion forward and get the bill over the line without language being attached. But you're right. I mean, personnel is a big deal, and who's in charge of these agencies matters to senators. They may never get a chance to weigh in on Pulte, but if the Blanche nomination is to go through, it has to get through committee and through the Senate. So we'll be watching very closely in the coming weeks to see what the reaction is to that.
And those are both critical issues for the administration, so they've really sort of slowed the roll there, along with other things that are starting to sort of pile up. So let's talk about regular appropriations bills. How are we making progress there?
The House has made a good amount of progress. They've gotten 2 through the full House. They've gotten a lot more through subcommittee and full committee, and they are, if they stick to their schedule, on track to be done with all of them by the end of the month, at least through committee, which gives them a marker going forward. Now, the Senate has had a slower start. They were supposed to meet Thursday to do 3 bills. They postponed that in part because of the reconciliation debate. But Chairwoman Susan Collins told our reporter last week that if she could, she'd like to do 6 bills this coming Thursday through committee. Half the work could be done in one markup. I assume that would be a pretty long day if they were to try and get all 6 of those through, but that would be progress. So we're seeing some action toward that because September 30th isn't that far away, especially with the August recess and all the other things they need to do. But I think these are more markers for future talks than necessarily the answer to keeping the government open after September 30th. But we'll see.
Does that tempo now of progress surprise you, considering where we were earlier in the year?
A little bit. I mean, getting the bills through committee is easier. Getting, say, the agriculture bill across the floor last week took some arm twisting, and it was a close vote that didn't look like it might make it, although it did in the end. So it's going to be a tough process on this. It's, again, very narrow margins and very big decisions to make about where you want to make cuts and whether you want to boost defense as high as the administration wants to take it.
So in the midst of all of those normal appropriations conversations, the House is rolling towards Reconciliation 3.0.
That has been the talk. That's going to be a heavy lift. And if they want to do that, there are the procedural advantages and disadvantages we talked about. But there is still interest in doing the $350 billion for defense that was separate from what, for example, the authorization committee weighed, and what to do maybe around the affordability agenda or lowering prices. There's interest in passing anti-fraud pieces of legislation that would have a budgetary nexus. So there is interest in doing this, but that means 1 or 2 more vote-a-ramas in the Senate and trying to get all this done while chipping away at the other work. So it would be a tall order, but there remains interest and talk about doing that. So can't dismiss it.
And as we've talked about, there are a limited number of work days between now and the election.
Very few days, and the clock is ticking on them very quickly.
Loren Duggan is Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Loren, thanks as always.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.